In this session, we want to talk about Kerberos and Kerberos Delegation. Kerberos in a computer network is an authentication protocol that works on the basis of tickets. And these tickets allow communication over a network. What needs to happen is that one server needs to prove its identity to the other server. Or you can have a client trying to access resources on a server, but that client needs to authenticate. The client needs to say that here I am, and I am a member of Active Directory. I am a member of the domain. I have a username and I have a password. The security protocol or authentication protocol that we use is called Kerberos, and it allows us to prove the identity in a secure manner of the user who is logging on to gain access to the server. Let's take a look at this diagram. Within Active Directory, we have what we call the Key Distribution Center. The Key Distribution Center has two parts: the Authentication Service part, referred to as AS, and the Ticket Granting Service, referred to as TGS. Now here's the client on the left-hand side. The client wants to gain access probably to a file or a folder on the server, the network services server. First, the client has to contact the authentication service on the domain controller. And the client will say, I am Sue and I need a ticket to get ticket, known as a TGT. So the client now is asking for permission to get a ticket. The authentication service will check the Active Directory database to see if that user is a valid user. If the user is a valid user, then the authentication service is going to send a TGT back to the user. The user's password hash will decrypt that information if the person is a valid user. So when the user gets that ticket from the authentication service, the user then takes the ticket and sends the ticket to the Ticket Granting Service, known as TGS. The Ticket Granting Service will then send what we call a session ticket back to the user. The session ticket is a ticket that the user will need to actually have a connected session with the server that has the resources. So once the user gets that session ticket, the user sends it to the server. I have a ticket allowing me to gain access to the resources on your server. And the server then allows the user to access the folder, the file on the network. Kerberos Delegation. What is Kerberos Delegation? Kerberos Delegation is a feature that will allow an application to reuse the end user credentials to access resources on a different server. Let's look at the scenario that we have here. We have a client machine, we have a web server, we have an SQL backend server, and we have a server that has Active Directory, a domain controller. The client machine needs to access a report on the web server. So the web server has a link. When you click on this link, you're able to access a database report. But this database report really lives on the backend server. On the web server, what you have on the web server is simply the link to that database report. Now the user has logon access to the web server service, but the user does not have access to the SQL server. What we're doing here is removing the control from the resource administrator. The resource would be your SQL server, and you're removing control from that administrator, and you're placing control for logon permissions on the administrator of the front-end server or application, which would be the web server. So this model prevents the resource administrator from managing access to the resource. So delegation then is when this middle server here impersonates the client login when connecting to the backend server. So the user then is connecting to the backend server through the web server. And this is commonly called a double hop. So in order to make Windows authentication work in this situation, the middle server needs to impersonate the user when connecting to the backend machine. And this impersonation allows the backend machine to know the login of the original user so that queries can be run in the security context of the original user. So for the purpose of our session, our backend server is an SQL server. Now what we have to do is we have to delegate the web server. And we're going to go into Active Directory, and we're going to say that we want to trust the web server for delegation. We're going to go into Active Directory, Users and Computers. And we're here in the Computers container. And let us say that we wanted to use server 1 as the web server. We have to configure this server to be trusted for delegation. So you right-click on the server, whether it be a web server or what other type of server. You click on Properties, and you click on Delegation. Now you have some options here. Do not trust this computer for delegation. So by default, that's what happens. A system is not trusted for delegation by default. And notice it says up here, delegation is a security-sensitive operation which allows services to act on behalf of another user. So you have some choices here. I can say, trust this computer for delegation to any service, Kerberos only. Or I could say, trust the computer for delegation to specified services only. Use Kerberos only. Now, if I use the third option here, it means that I'm doing what is called constrained delegation, where the server can present delegated credentials for specific services. And then I can click on Add, and I can pick out the particular services. So that is constrained delegation. The second one here, trust this computer for delegation to any service. Kerberos only, it means that we can trust it for delegation to any service. Again, the third option is you want to do constrained delegation, where you're only going to pick out a particular service. And that is how we configure Kerberos delegation. In our next session, we want to take a look at service principal needs. Thank you for listening.